Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with a replay from the Gold League sent in to me by Psychotropic. Just before the game started, did you know that on the MLG maps, this actually happens? The depot starts up, and as soon as you start the game, it actually lowers itself into the lowered position so that you can walk over it. I just assumed that it had started down. That was the first time I ever saw that. Just thought I'd point it out. Anyway, this game, it has nothing really to do with anything. This game was sent in by Psychotropic. I've done a few of his games so far. Started off in Bronze League, and he's now actually worked his way up to Gold. You'll notice this is on an MLG map. This is actually from one of the Playhem tournaments. If you haven't checked that site out, do so. It's got tournaments for all levels. I believe this was a Bronze through Gold League tournament that this is from. His opponent is the Terran player BaiBoWen, or BaiBoWen, whatever. Whoever he is, he's over here on the left-hand side in orange, and he's going to be the bad guy for today because we are focusing on the Protoss player. The three things that I'm going to focus on most during this game are, number one, the idea of tech switching at appropriate times. When you find that you are hard countered by something or just getting hit by something over and over and your composition isn't really working, then you need to be tech switching into something else a little more smoothly. There's certain things that are going to work better against certain races or not, and certain compositions and strategies or not. You want to try and stay ahead of the curve of what your opponent is doing and making sure that you're moving into something that's going to be beneficial to you as opposed to lagging behind and being reactive. Some races like the Zerg are meant to be a bit reactive, but that's usually in terms of what you build, not in the tech plan that you have. You usually still at least need that key tech building down so that you have the option of transitioning into something later. Second thing I'm going to look at is upgrades. There's certain key upgrades that you need during the game, whether it is actual unit ability upgrades such as charge, blink, range on a Colossus, things like that, or whether it is the actual combat upgrades, +1 attack, +1 armor, that sort of thing. You want to be staying on par with your opponent, not letting them get it way ahead of you. They really do make a big difference, and a lot of times people do underestimate that sort of thing. The third thing that I'm going to look at this game is more of a conceptual thing. It's the idea of risk versus reward. What is actually worth the risk when you're talking about an attack or taking a tech path or deciding on something economical, and what is not worth that risk for the reward that you're actually going to get out of it. And that'll come up at a few points during this game, and we'll take a look at whether the correct decision was made or not. So to the actual game part here, we've got pretty normal stuff obviously going down by Psychotropic. He is getting a second gas already, and chrono boosting out a stalker. He's going to then send these over to the enemy base to take a look around. His initial scouting did just kind of get wall blocked there. He didn't see any add-on on the barracks or anything like that, so not a lot of information was gained, so he will be sending his first stalker over to take a peek over there. Often what you do want to do is send your zealot and stalker over. There are certain cases when that can actually do a lot of damage. You poke the zealot up first, it will absorb some of the fire. The stalker can then occasionally pick off 1, 2, 3 marines with the zealot kind of covering it, pull the zealot back before he gets killed, and you can actually do a fair bit of damage. I've outright won games because the player was making 3 marines and then adding their add-on on the barracks and couldn't produce any more, and the zealot and stalker literally just won because they couldn't actually defend themselves at that point. And then you get another one coming out, rallied right over to the point. So putting that pressure on early, it's not only a good secondary scout to see what's going on. He was able to see that there was a marauder there. You're not going to get your unit caught So it's not going to be concussive shell down or anything this early in the game, so you'll always be able to get out of there. And seeing that Marauder tells them that there is at least a gas taken here, and since there's no add-on on this barracks, seeing that Marauder tells them there's at least one other barracks with an add-on in this base, therefore it is not just a 1-1-1 build that's going on, it's going to be something else. In this case, obviously, it is going to be an expansion play that is going on. The Protoss player over here isn't opting to expand or anything himself. He's going for a 3-gate robotics build and then chronoing out an Immortal. He seems to have sensed that there is a expansion play obviously going on there, which is a pretty decent assumption based on what he's seen, the wall off, not a lot of anything requiring gas, and it's not a 1-1-1 or anything. So he is safe to assume that there is an expansion going on here. His poke-in does happen to see that there are two bunkers going down, and there was enough of an army there to just drive him back initially so that he just got a quick look. Doesn't actually see the expansion there, but again, this is pretty good indicator that that is in fact what is going on. But here's where we enter into the scenario of risk versus reward. Knowing that that expansion is likely going down here, you have to look at your chances of, can I just break this and try and end the game right now, or at least kill off this expansion, or am I better off just going for my own expansion back home? Given the positions that he's in basically the farthest position away, so the Immortals, which are really the key to this attack, are going to be a bit slow in getting over there, so he ends up going with only one Immortal. The initial Zealots coming in get picked off very, very quickly. There's a lot of troops really out there, and it makes this attack very prohibitive. Now we'll take another look at that again, because it's kind of in the middle of a point as this goes on. He ends up losing a lot more than he really had to. He could have aborted that a lot sooner, not lost the second Immortal and so forth. But I'll just back up to the beginning of that, and we'll look at that a little slower. So with this force coming in, you have to kind of make these assessments of whether or not you can actually break through something. With the units at his disposal, he's got 3 Zealots, 5 Stalkers, 3 Sentries, and 1 Immortal. Immortal's pretty good at taking down the bunkers, but the Zealots are really what is required to make sure that this force doesn't actually come right at you. If there's nothing to push them back, meaning the Zealots that do a lot of damage when they're really close, then this is just a ranged versus ranged fight, and there's Marauders out. So those Marauders are absolutely going to tear through these Stalkers, and the Marines are going to tear right through the Immortals. A lot of force fields went down there, but no Guardian Shield went up, so there wasn't any mitigation of this ranged damage. And the force fields that did go down went down to preemptively prevent a repair on the bunkers, but there were no SCVs coming up to do that, and they could have been better used as a Guardian Shield, or preventing reinforcements from coming down by putting a force field here, or splitting up or blocking behind the troops for Zealots to come in. The key to the success of one of those types of attacks is often overwhelming with some of the Zealots, which come in and do that contact damage against these units, and they're the cheapest thing that you have, so it's them that has to absorb the fire, them that has to do the damage and make sure this army is backing up, dancing around, and so forth, and then your support units do it. If you're just left with those other gateway expensive units, you're going to lose a lot more. So this attack was really quite disastrous. He ended up with a loss of 3,000 resources worth of stuff versus 1,000. So not only is the 18 supply behind now coming from a lead, but the value of what was lost is just a lot more. So the risk reward of that attack wasn't there. He was just a little slower in recognizing that that's what he was going to do, because of course it was a slightly later expansion from the Terran player. It wasn't a completely fast expansion. It was a bit more supported by the number of barracks that he did have. So you have to be able to recognize some of that stuff in the game and know that it's not an attack worth making. So the situation that we're now in, obviously, as the Protoss player, is we're way behind. Really doing that sort of attack is generally I break it or I'm going to lose sort of scenario, and he is a fair bit behind, but there are obviously ways that you can claw your way back into the game. But he's not actually pursuing that right now. We can see that there is a lot of money banked for Psychotropic, but he's not producing out of these structures. He's not adding any tech. He's not doing anything to really get ahead militarily or in his tech. What he's doing instead is going for a hidden expansion over here in the top position. Now, that again brings up its own risk versus reward scenario. The risk of this is that this is in a completely indefensible position. If that's spotted by a Terran player, and it is really on his side of the map, he could drop it, he could just run right into it, he could do anything to it, and it's a really hard position for the Protoss to come defend, as he'd have to walk down here, actually loop around, get up a ramp, get there, or else be able to warp in on the spot, and you usually don't want to warp in with no prior defense at a spot that's being dropped unless it's a really small drop force. He's also then just making units at the Nexus itself, trying to kind of populate it with the probes that he can produce here. So not only is this pretty risky, but he's not really getting a maximum reward out of it. If you are going to take this sort of risk, there is certainly more of a risk to send a few probes over, but if you're going to do it, send more than 3. You're taking a risk that they're going to be seen on the way. If this little SCV happened to wander over there, he would see it immediately and you're caught. So if you're going to make the risk of that transfer, send a lot of them. So that you can mine this out, and hopefully eventually it's going to be discovered. Pretty much you're never going to mine this out before it's going to be discovered. So get as much out of there as you can, and then keep these ones going a lot longer. You're going to mine this out quite quickly, so get as many of them over here as you can, and be getting as much out of there before it's actually taken down, which it almost inevitably will be at some point in the game. So just again from a risk-reward profile, this is very risky for a limited reward that he's getting out of it. It may have made more sense to take your risk on the tech side of things. That would be investing in, say, Dark Templar, taking a risk that he won't have adequate detection in place. We do know that he didn't, at the time, have missile turrets in place. Now he does. But had he gone right for it, that may have been a good idea. He could have simply taken the base down here, tried to defend it more conventionally with the army that he has available, rather than take that hidden base, which did inevitably get dropped, and was actually dropped by accident. This I noticed before, but I'm just going to kind of show you what sort of thing can happen that just gets you accidentally caught. There's 2 drop ships coming in, and their intention was to drop this base. They had a waypoint set to just drop over here. And this is the sort of thing that happens. He doesn't even notice it right away, but then sees on his mini-map, oh, there is a base here, I'm just going to drop it instead. So you can be caught totally by accident. Someone can have the game sense to know, well, you're producing too much, you must have a 3rd base somewhere, or it can be just a total fluke like that. He just happened to set his rally point, and he saw that it was there, so he drops it and you lose everything. So you didn't get a lot of mining out of there, never really reap the full rewards of that base. As that's going down, you also then want your replacement to be the first thing on your mind. you know that that's losing the moment that is dropped. There's not even a thought that you might defend that. 2 full dropships worth of stuff. There's no way to pull your army over there. There's nothing really that you could possibly warp in or anything like that. So your first thought has to be, okay, I'm going to immediately replace it. Particularly with this many minerals left over, while that was going down, he should have dropped his next nexus and started pulling the probes away from there. Instead, he kind of waited, isn't really doing anything, taking care of this attack. A second prong of it is coming in here. He's not being proactive, and it won't be until this is ultimately cleaned up that he even starts getting another base out, meaning that he's just behind bases the entire game, and you're just not really going to win anything doing that. He gets quite lucky here that the Terran engages in just a horrible location, walks directly into a bunch of zealots, tries to go up this ramp, gets force fielded apart. Just a horrible engagement by the Terran, and it actually puts the Protoss a bit back into this game, particularly once you add a few of these misrallied units in. He did happen to get a dropship full of stuff sniped off in 2 places, one over here and one over here. So it does get him a little bit back into this game. But by having this expansion now just starting at 19 minutes, when it could have been started at around 16, 17, when that other base was caught, I believe the initial drop happened at 16 minutes, this could actually be done right now. Now, yeah, it would have been attacked as there was a force coming in here. That would have gave him early warning. Either way, it could have been up a lot quicker than this, as opposed to just having probes waiting, one base completely mined out, and this one certainly oversaturated. From the upgrade point of view, he is at 1-1, but the forge didn't go down until much later in the game. The charge upgrade isn't done. The blink upgrade isn't done. In fact, he's just in the middle of charge now. Knowing that this is a massively bio army, he does want to have that charge a lot sooner than this, than 20 minutes into the game. You want to have that Twilight cancel out and researching for you. The charge is really what closes that gap and creates the contact with the bio army, forcing them to either back up and stutter step away or just take the brunt of that force. It's also what makes a lot of your force fields really effective, holding the army in place, splitting them up. The charge closing the gap on a split up army is really devastating to a bio army, and it's going to make them a lot more dependent on the medevacs and pulling away, healing, and coming at you again. Since we know that he's transitioned into Vikings as well to deal with the Colossus, there's going to be less medevacs out on the field, as he is just replacing those now, so it was a bad time for me to mention it. But we know that there's Vikings out on the field, so the Colossus itself is reduced in its effectiveness. You do want to be transitioning into a different unit composition. You don't want to be making just 1-2 Colossus that are going to be immediately picked off by the Vikings that are already out on the field that you don't really have a way of stopping in time before they can shoot down one thing. It's another issue if you had 4 or 5 already and you're just adding to that count and you're shielded by the Stalkers, but that one isn't going to do much good for you. You're better off transitioning into a High Templar, into Archons, something like that, that more addresses what the opponent has. You know that he doesn't have a lot of medevacs with a lot of energy out there, and he's got a lot of injured units. Having Archons with that splash damage, in addition to the charged Zealots, which are now ready, is a bit better of a composition to be going for on this. So you do want to make sure that tech switches address what your opponent actually has, and that you're being a little more proactive with it, as opposed to this just putting it down now. Now we're seeing kind of the final engagement coming up. Not a great location for that engagement on this ramp, not allowing him to get a good concave. You can see a lot of his army just kind of fumbling around in the back. These being rallied in, not doing anything. There wasn't a lot of sentries with that army, and just now we see that Storm is still not even upgraded yet. It was a bit late to switch into the Templar, which are coming out now. Knowing that there are drops going down, you can be using those to feed back medevacs. In this case, he does end up feedbacking a couple Thors, which does some damage, certainly worth doing if he transitions into that later. But in general, you do want those a lot sooner to try and take advantage of the fact that he is in heavy bio and that he's got those Vikings out there which are going to just pick apart your Colossus anyway. So to recap in this game, largely it was lost in the first 8 or 9 minutes there. When the attack at the front of the Terran base failed, he was really behind in the expansion by several minutes. It didn't get up and running at his natural until about the 12-minute mark, which is just really late to be having that happening. So it was a bit of an all-in attack that was actually happening, which is okay. Definitely there are times when it's completely appropriate to do that. However, given the composition of what the Terran had and the distance between the two and the composition of the Protoss army, it didn't make sense to actually make that attack at the time. The risk versus reward wasn't there. Even if he had been able to break through, there wasn't enough bulk or there just really wasn't enough zealots in that army to do a ton of damage. You could have got that swarmed by the SCVs available, and you were never going to be able to get up and actually break the Terran base. The best case scenario is taking out the expansion, which was really only going to equalize where you were, and the technology would still continue in the Terran base itself. He could also easily just kind of lift that away. There's not the steamroll that was required to make that attack. Usually you want more immortals to that to really break through, and you want those zealots really creating that front line that's punishing the Terran for trying to take that quickly. That wasn't really the case here. It was a later one, and it was a lot more defended one, so the risk just wasn't, risk-reward just wasn't there. Later on in the game, obviously, in trying to come back, you do have to take some risks to be able to come back in the game. He opted to try for the hidden expansion. However, I'd argue that it wasn't actually necessary at the time. He may have been better off taking the conventional expansion, but instead taking a risk on some technology, going maybe into Dark Templar, and knowing that if they failed, you could always convert back into Archons. A lot of people just go the High Templar Archon route. Remember, obviously, you can make them out of DTs, and if he's a bio army, that's certainly a good fallback if you don't do enough damage with your DTs. But Terrans, despite having scans at their orbital commands, often have a really hard time dealing with DTs once they're split up and spread throughout their base. It can just be a real pain, and it can buy you a lot of time. It can certainly prevent attacks out in the middle of the map, since they can really only move out when they have a lot of scans available. So it can help you get up another expansion that when you need to catch up. So it's not always doesn't always have to do a lot of damage. It can just delay them and hold them off while you then power up your economy and try and catch back up. So those were really the key factors in the game. So I hope you find that helpful. On top of everything, obviously there were some macro slips there which I tried to point out, and the upgrades in the final battle ended up being 2-2 against 1-1. You just can't get that far behind on the upgrades. That's going to kill you every time, particularly when it's the Terran. Just the way their upgrades work make them a lot more effective than the Protoss ones to begin with. So you want to avoid that situation. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll try and get more of these up soon. I did have a little bit of a lapse there of about a week or more. I was actually out of town for a while, and then didn't want to put any videos out at the same time MLG was on. So just catching up on a few now. I'll try and get them out on a more steady basis in the future.